Ready?
Yep.
All right. Going live. You're live.
Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to the shop. Hopefully my microphone is working so that we don't have our normal early faux pas of I'm talking but you don't hear anything. But this is the monthly Q&A. I did it about a week later than normal, so we are going to be answering whatever questions you have. If you are live and watching now, go ahead and throw them in the chat. If you can put question or something like that at the beginning, a notifier, some icon that makes it pop out, just makes it easier to see as they scroll by. Sarah, my wife, hi.
Hello.
She will be studiously keeping track of them all. So if you are watching this recorded sometime in the future, you can actually go down into the description, and I have timestamps by all of the questions, so you can actually read through them and see if there's a question you want to see what the answer is and jump straight to it in the video, or jump close to it, because I'll have them at 1 minute increments. So if you like that, then also the timeline kind of breaks up things, so you can see that as well. We'll have a little bit of fun tonight, so I'm looking forward to seeing what questions we got.
I love how you clarified sometime in the future. Now, if one of you have invented time travel, that'd be wonderful. But
yeah. As updates, Sarah, we didn't get any chance for Sarah to work on the bench. So
we had family Christmas.
Yes, we did our last Christmas, since we were going to do it over at Thanksgiving time, and due to all sorts of life issues, it got moved off to this last week. So yeah. So what questions we got?
Oh, let's see. So obviously the first question from Moonwolf is, how's Sarah's bench coming? Did you make her that romantic dinner for that comment you made?
I think I owe her more than one romantic dinner.
It's a life sentence.
Yes.
But no bench updates.
No.
Maybe this weekend. I don't know.
Actually, I did some work on it today without you knowing.
Well, now I know.
I flipped it over and I flattened the underside of the bench because I wanted to do a video on how to flatten a bench top. But since you already flattened the bench top, I had to flatten the bench bottom.
Oh, okay. Whatever.
The intention was where the legs contact the bottom, just flatten those small spots where the legs touch. That way you don't have to flatten the whole thing. Because the underside doesn't have to be clean. You can leave the glue drips and whatnot on it.
I mean, I'm short, but I'm not that short to see underneath.
So now you have a nice smooth bottom. Hey! Tom, thank you, man.
Keep it G, James. Keep it G.
What does Tom have to say?
Tom says, Kareen's into hall riding horse, falling gracefully. Let's rock and roll. Knights of the White Oak. All hail King James.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, hang on. Hang on.
Oh, there it is.
I had a joke. Hang on.
I'm hanging. I'm holding. For anyone who does a super chat, you get a special mom joke
Where did I save it?
Sarah.
Okay.
She actually collects them throughout the week. So
I try. Some weeks are better than others. Is it this one?
Do you want to give me a question while you look?
Nope.
No, she's almost there.
Yeah, go ahead. I thought I had a different one.
Well, what's the next question?
Sean Belcher asked, is there an easier way to sharpen a chamfered iron? I cannot get the hang of this. Any decent jigs?
Sharpen a chamfered iron.
Uh-huh.
I don't exactly know what you mean by a chamfered iron. Yeah, I don't know. Unless you're talking like a skewed iron where it's not 90 degrees to the sides. And in all honesty, it's the exact same as a straight iron. It's just the iron's going off to the side. So your hands holding it should be holding the exact same way. And so you should be pushing perpendicular to the cutting edge, not in line with the iron. So don't try and push in line with the iron. Keep the cutting edge straight forward. So your fingers are tight down on that cutting edge, holding it down to the plate as you move it. The rest of your hand holding onto the iron is just barely touching it. Let me see if
Is there such a thing as a cambered iron?
Oh, a cambered iron. Yeah, a cambered iron, like on a scrub plane where it's rounded. Here, pull this one out. Come on, out. It's actually just using this one today. And this one, switch over here, it is rounded. And so what you want to think about it is rather than always doing all of it, so you can start over here and tip it from one side to the other. So as you pull it back, you're rocking it from one side to the other. That works pretty well, but what you can do is think about it as a flat iron and do this area and then roll it just a little bit and do this area and then roll it just a little bit and do this area and then roll it just a little bit and do this area. And think about it as a flat iron, but just do every little bit. And yes, you will get these tiny little facets, but in actual functionality, it won't make any difference because as you do it on this plate, you'll get one facet. You do it on this plate, you'll get a whole new series of facets. And you do it on this plate, you'll get a whole other series of facets. And eventually it'll round out. So by the time you get to the strop, you get a nice rounded edge. So just focusing spot by spot by spot can actually do really well. They do actually make jigs to do cambered irons. And you can get, what is it, the Veritas Mark II has a cambered iron wheel. So the wheel is actually rounded, so it will rock and tip with it. But I've never gotten one and never tried it, so I don't know how well that would work. Did you get the mom joke?
Yeah, but I don't know that it would translate. Sometimes
Is it a
they
nursing
read.
joke?
Sometimes they read better than they sound out loud. So.
Why is that stuck? Do you have another question then, or? Here it goes.
Ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
What was Jack the Ripper's middle name? Yeah.
Did I get it?
Yes. That's what I get for just looking for it real fast. All right. Sorry, Tom. That was kind of. There's so many questions coming up. It's getting hard. Oh my gosh, I got to get back to my job.
Well, we may not get to any questions, so if you really want your question answered, there's a super chat. Otherwise, we'll get to them in the order that they come in.
We try. Let's see, Moonwolf. One question. I'm making a shelving unit to hold paint bottles, and I want to dado for the 3 shelves. Would it be best to set the 2 boards side by side to mark where the dados go?
Yes, yeah. So if you have shelves, the shelves run into the verticals. There is a slot that they fit into. It's a dado because it goes across the grain. And so you want to put that in. But you want to make this slot at the same height that you make this slot. So what you do is you bring those 2 boards together and you mark across all of them where all the shelves are at. And that way when you bring them apart, you can continue those lines across the board and you can make sure that they're all exactly at the same height. So that way you can make sure that all your shelves are lateral rather than tipped one way or the other. But yes, put them together, mark them together, and that will give you the best action. Hey, we got another super chat.
Oh, hang on.
Zachery Marvin.
Trying. All right. So
What do you have to say?
He has a question. I'm trying to make a chest. How would you make a rounded top/lid?
So like well, if you're just talking about a standard round, you actually have rounded end caps, and then you have slats going across each one all the way around that round. And so in that case, each slat is slightly curved inside, and it's backed out. So you actually use a scrub plane or a backing out plane. And a backing out plane is usually used in boats because they'll put the slats, the boards that are on the outside of the boat, go over the curvature of the boat, and so they back out the inside at a curved radius to go on all of the ribs, the frames of the boat. So it'd be the same thing on the top of a chest. So you'd have the slats going all the way across that. Now, if you want it to be double rounded, so in other words, the slats go around the round, and they also arch all the way across it. That is a barrel top chest, and for that you're actually going to get into Cooper working, and that's a lot of work. You have the slats that are backed out, but then they're also bent, and they're all the angles aren't all exactly the same because they all have to meet at whatever angle they have on there, and it is a pain to do. But if you look up how to make a Coopered barrel, you're going to do the exact same thing. It's just cut in half, and one half is the top of the chest. So, yeah, that's not an easy project, but it would be kind of fun. I have thought about doing one of those one of these days, but chests and crates don't intrigue me that much, though there's a lot of learning experience there. So maybe sometime in the future. So thanks, Zachery. What's the next question?
Let's see. Jonathan Haynie, my wife wants me to ask how I can prevent hurting myself in the shop. Only minor scrapes so far, but she hears about hospital trips and gets worried that I'll be next.
Well, in all honesty, if you're doing hand tools, cuts and scrapes are about as bad as it gets. Because every tool you use is flesh sensing. It stops when it cuts. If you're working with power tools, then you've got a whole other series of safety things you have to think through. But usually the biggest thing is just slow down. We like to rush into things. We want to get it done. We want to go through it. We want to get through all these steps. And that's when things run into problems. Number two, make sure your tools are sharp. Dull tools, you have to put more force behind them. And when you're putting a lot of force into something and it slips, it can jump out and bite you. Sharp tools will go through the wood much easier, and you're not putting as much force into it. There's less chance of problems. The biggest cuts I've had have been when something falls off the bench and I reach to grab it. When something falls off the bench, let it fall. Yes, it will damage the tool, but it's better damaging the tool than damaging you. So, but most of the time with hand tools, I really haven't heard of any serious injury with hand tools. Nothing much more than a Band-Aid or maybe some stitches.
You've never had stitches with hand tools?
I've never had stitches with hand tools. I've never even heard of anyone needing much more than that with hand tools. So, yeah. Sounds like, don't worry too much. What's next?
Alex asks, I just received my cabinet scraper, Stanley 80, thanks to eBay gods. For some reason, it has a rounded edge, like on a scrub plane.
Huh.
Did someone have a reason for it, or just accident?
Well, the thing is, when you use a card scraper, you actually want to bend it a little bit. It makes it much easier to spot clean things. So when you have a regular card scraper, you actually bend it so you're just hitting a small spot rather than using the whole surface to try and scrape all the way across. You just bend it to hit one little spot, and you hit that little spot. With a cabinet scraper, you don't really do that because the cabinet scraper holds the whole thing. Now, you are actually bending it so you're just hitting a little bit in one spot. But I have seen a few people try to actually camber this to exaggerate that a bit more. Again, that might also be if someone used it for backing out, like we were talking with the slats or on a boat. But it's probably someone just did it because either they didn't know what they were doing and they wanted to over-exaggerate that spot cleaning, or they had a very specific use for it, which is usually the case, very specific uses. So, interesting. Oh, did Zachery have a mom joke?
He did not have his mom joke yet.
Well, what's the next question? What are you looking for that?
Let's see. DHC 1802. Which hand tools are worth buying the premium version of versus the standard?
Well, okay. When you start talking about quality, you have the junk that is sold big box stores and sold to the general user. Most of the time, it's just not worth anything at all. Then you have the early mid-grade. That's the Tay tools. That is, some people might put Cobalt and the Grizzly tools in there. They're cheap, but if you fix them up and you get them going, they will work well, and they'll treat you well. And then you have the nicer tools. These are ones that will do a good bit more. You have your Wood River. You have the new Stanley Sweethearts. You spend a bit more for them. They're nice tools. but they're not the premium ones. And then you have your premium tools, and these you're going to be spending through the mouth. And that's over exaggeration of different types. Everyone it's a big spectrum, and their tools fall all the way along it. Some of them are on the line, and some people may move the lines one way or the other. But really, all you need is that basic to get things done. Now, everything from there on depends on your budget. If you've got the money for it, and you want to feel a little bit better, then you might want to bump up a range. And if you really have the money in stock and you don't mind spending it, everything from that point on is fit and finish and feel and how it makes you feel. Because that's really a lot of what the hand tools are, is how they make you feel in the shop. How much fun is it for you? And so a tool you have to spend a good bit more time on to tweak it and get it right to make it run well. That may take the fun out of it for some people, in which case then paying more for a better tool that they don't have to tweak all the time, a tool that feels really good in the hand, a tool that is finished nice and has a nice weight and balance to it. Sometimes it's worth spending that money, and so it really depends on you. Actual functionality, very rarely is that as much a thing as how does it make you feel when you use it. Or how frustrated are you with one tool over another. If you find that you're getting frustrated with a tool and you have the money, jump up to something better that doesn't make you frustrated, it makes you happier. Do you need to jump up? No. A tool that makes you frustrated but still does the work, well, it still does the work. You don't need to jump up to anything else. But a tool that's frustrating and you have the money to jump up to something else, well, jump up to something else and have fun in the shop. Don't waste your time with something that's not fun for you. So it's really a very personal question. So it's not something I can say generally over everything. And across the board in different types of tools, it's all fairly similar. I think chisels are probably the first place I would jump up to something premium, like these Nerix Richter chisels. These are phenomenal, and the price really isn't that high on them, but the feel of them and the function of them are it's incredible. That was one that's the price needed to jump up to one of those from a base model isn't that much, and it is a really good thing for that. When you talk about planes, there's just so many different jumps in that. In saws, it's all about the feel. A better quality saw will not cut better. It will only cut as well as the last person who filed it. The saw is completely determined on who sharpened it. So when you're buying a better saw, you're buying something that has a handle that feels good, it has a good balance, a good weight to it. That's all a very, very personal thing. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to answer that one directly other than broad range. I hope that helped you though. So what do we got next?
A mom joke.
Oh, what we got?
For Zach. What's the hardest thing to sell a zombie?
What?
Life insurance.
Life insurance. Hey, Tom, thanks, man.
Tom's wife must be watching with him right now.
Why? What's that?
Says, my beautiful wife bought me an amazing Florip dovetail saw. How often should I wax it to keep it cutting and looking great?
You wax it as often as it starts to bind in the cut. You put wax in the saw plates and it runs through the wood smoothly. Now, if you're talking about for rust protection, it just depends on how rusty you are. For me around here, it's once every 6 months or so that I wax and oil saws that aren't used. But if you are in a very wet environment, you may need to do it every week. So it just depends on how, what's the moisture content in your shop. So yeah, sounds like a good time. I'm wanting to get a floor tip saw here soon. It's been on my list for a while because I want to have one to show off. The couple that I played with have been really good quality for the price. So sounds good. Is that another one? James?
Yes. So, okay, well, for Tom, oh yeah, we did Tom. So we have two jokes we got to do. But James Crandall says, thank you for all your help, James and Sarah. The Hive Mind and the Patreon group have been. Wouldn't be where I am today without woodworking. Y'all have helped me make this goal.
Well, thanks, James. We'll keep them coming.
Ah.
And for those of you who don't know, we have a Facebook group called the Wood by Wright Hive Mind, and it is where I kind of bounce ideas off of people, and it's a place where people can show off what they're working on, ask questions about how they're doing it, and be completely open, because everyone in there, from the very first tool they picked up to seasoned woodworkers who've been doing it for their entire life. So there's a lot of good things going on there. What?
Did you hear about the new dating site for retired chemists?
What?
It's called Carbon Dating. I like that one.
Yes, I like it. I like it. Sounds like a good site for me. Or it would have been a good site for me.
I was like, excuse a moi, when you have found perfection, what else do you need?
What's another question then while you're searching?
Give me a second.
I'm giving you seconds.
Why did the scientist go to the tanning salon?
Why did the scientist go to the tanning salon? Why?
Because he was a paleontologist.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good one. What's the next question?
Okay, hang on. Luis Fernando Carrion-Gonzalez. I hear people mention it's wonderful to work with wooden planes, but in almost every video they use metal planes. What's the deal?
Wooden planes feel good. The feeling of wood sliding across the work, it's got good vibrations. However, they're a little bit more finicky. You have to spend more time adjusting them. There's a whole other skill that goes into working with wooden planes. On top of that, you need to flatten them more often. You need to flatten them. Metal planes, you flatten them every few decades. But with wooden planes, they wear out, and every time you flatten it, you take a little material off, and so the mouth gets a little bigger. There's less adjustment to them. So they tend to be more finicky and function. But that being said, when you're actually working with them and they're tuned up well and everything is set on it, they are amazing to work with. They just take a lot of work to get to that. Whereas with a metal plane, it doesn't take much of any work. You just do a couple quick tweaks with the adjustments on them, and they run. It's not something you really have to think about. So it depends on the person. If you're the person where it's all about the feeling in the moment, then the wooden planes may be for you. If you're the person where you're getting things done and you actually want to accomplish things, metal planes are usually where you're going to go. And so, yeah, I do like metal planes. I mean, then you have the best of both worlds, the transitional. You have the wood sliding that feels really good, but you have the faster adjustment. You still have the problem with the sole wearing out. But they feel very, very good. So it's kind of a personal preference, though. Most people, unless they're doing reenactment, tend to go with metal planes. They're more functional as a tool. So that's usually the way it runs. What's next?
Okay, hang on. Dad Gamet. Is it true that if you use walnut for rockers on chairs, they will not creep?
Walnut for rockers on chairs?
A rocking chair, I'm assuming?
No. Because the thing that creaks is when joints, like you have a tenon going into the rocker, that will loosen up and it will creak on the wood. Yeah, all wood will creak at one point or another. Apparently there's a bit of a myth out there. I mean, I could say I've never tested it. I've never heard that one before, so I'm very skeptical about that, though. Sounds like a fun test, though. I would have to play with that. But yeah, no, all wood is the same in that aspect, as far as I know. What's next?
All right. Oh, creep across the floor, he clarified.
Oh, won't creep? Oh.
Did you think I said creek?
Creek.
Oh, creep.
I, again, have no idea. I would assume it would be the exact same as any other wood you'd have. I don't know what would make it different. Walnut is a good bit softer than I would want to use on rocker rails. It would wear out a good bit faster. But
So there's nothing that'll make
I
it
don't know why that would
move
make it-
less
no.
or wander.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that has less to do with the wood as it does with the personal motion. Because you have every action is an opposite and equal reaction.
Thank you.
What's next?
Irby asked, is there a best finish for restricting seasonal wood movement?
No. Well, the only thing you can do is to fully encapsulate something in like epoxy so that no air comes in or out. With most all finishes out there, your polys, your varnishes and lacquers, oils, they all let air go in and out. There is no such thing as sealing it. You know, putting on a wax finish is still going to let air go in and out, and some moisture is still going to go in and leave the wood. So the only way you can stop that is to fully encapsulate it. And so no. You can stabilize wood, in other words, fill it with epoxy so that there isn't a way for the water to interact with the wood, but it will still, yeah, it would be difficult to stabilize large pieces of wood. They will all finishes will allow moisture to come and go. So no.
Sorry, I had a work text.
What's next?
Let's see. Harold Golden. I have a Sargent 415 plane I wanted to restore. The plane iron is badly pitted and needs to be replaced. Where should I look? Is the plane worth it or should I quit now?
I have no idea what a Sargent 415 is. I would have to look that up. Yeah, I don't know.
Send it to James in a message.
Yeah, put it on the hive mind and we can answer that. Sargent uses different numbers than everyone else. So most other companies still use the Stanley numbering method just because it's standardized. But Sargent did a few other weirdos. What's next?
Okay, hang on. I'm trying to catch up on.
Yeah, we probably will not get to all these questions. So if people are posting now, probably not going to see your question.
But you can still put it up there. Okay. Laurence Goedar, sorry. Will a warped board still warp when it is thoroughly air dried and then flattened?
Yes, yes. Well, they will not warp as much. Once it has been dried, they will get to an equilibrium. But as the moisture comes and goes, that warp will move seasonally. Now, if you have it in an air-conditioned house where the moisture doesn't change that much throughout the year, the warping will be less. But if it's something that's outside or in an unair-conditioned space, the warping will be very visible throughout the year. But it will not warp as much as it does when it dries and gets rid of all of the initial moisture. So, yes, if you want to see it, I have a video on wood movement. I actually have like 3 or 4 different videos on wood movement, where I actually explain what is wood movement and how does the wood move, because it's one of those scary things when you talk about wood movement, like, oh no, my table's moving. It doesn't mean that. Or when you have someone say, yeah, don't use that joinery, it'll explode. It doesn't actually explode, it just might weaken. So, yeah, take a look at those videos. What's next?
Okay, hang on. Stop it. Okay. Alan Smith. What will be some of the upcoming projects or techniques and any new old tools to use?
Well, I've got the flattening of the bench bottom. I'm actually making a clock with a pendulum. Let's see what other things we have. I've got a glue test video coming up. That one actually maybe Thursdays. I've got another cutting board, another shooting board. That one's coming up. I've got a moccasin vise. I'm thinking about going through and doing the joinery window again, coming up here soon, and going through those because it's kind of fun to do all those joints. Let's see, what other things do I have coming up right now? I don't know. I'm in the middle of cramming because we're going to be gone next month, so I'm trying to get all the videos ready for that. But, yeah. Hey, Tom West. Thank you, man.
Yes.
What's Tom have to say?
So Tom says, so the amount that a piece of wood changes in a particular time is technically warp speed?
Ooh, yes. I like that one.
Of course you do.
Nice, Tom.
Now you're going to tell him to live long and prosper. Anyways.
Always.
Why did the knight surrender once all of his limbs were cut off?
Why?
He was unarmed and defeated. I have to prepare better next week. I know.
What's next?
What did Alex have to say? Can you highlight again your way of finish with BLO and wax? Do you do multiple coats of BLO and any white beyond 15 minutes? And how long to wait to wax before polish? And how shiny I should expect?
Well, with the BLO, the object is not coats. BLO does not coat the wood. Okay, you can do coats of BLO, but that takes a lot of work. What you're going to be doing is actually letting the BLO soak into the wood, and you want to let the BLO let the wood take up as much BLO as it wants. And so you put it on, and it soaks up some, and you put more on there, and it soaks up some more, and you put more on there, and it soaks up some more, until you just do it until it stops absorbing the BLO and it's filled up. Then you wipe it off, let it sit for a little bit. Sometimes I don't even let it sit because it will automatically polymerize even with the moisture, the air in the wood. So the purpose with BLO is to fill the wood. Then the wax comes on, and you put the wax on, and there's usually a thinner in the wax, or there's BLO in there, and you want it to harden and set up a little bit. Either the thinner has to come out, or the oil starts to polymerize. And that depends on the oil. The stuff I use, it's usually I leave it on there for about 2 to 3 hours. And then I'm going to come back through and polish it off until the wood feels smooth. You're not going to get a gloss finish on it. That is not what BLO and paste wax do. You're going to get a very matte, soft finish. If you want gloss, then you're going to want to do a film finish where you actually build up layers of lacquer or poly or something of that nature. But wax does not do that. Wax can make a gloss finish a little more glossy, but it's not going to make an oil finish a little more glossy. Now that being said, you can build up layers of BLO, but what you have to do is coat it on, wipe off the excess, and let it sit until it fully polymerizes, whether that's 2 or 3 days. And then you put on another coat and let that sit for another 2 to 3 days. And it has to fully polymerize before you put the next coat on. A lot of gun stocks are actually done that way, and they'll actually do it over the course of a couple months to get the finish onto it and actually build up layers of BLO. It is a very time-consuming process, but BLO is not a protective surface. It is something that adds color and slightly polymerizes the wood. It is not a protective film finish. So that's something that confuses some people. Is that one from Aaron?
Excuse me. Yes.
Thanks, Aaron.
It says, missed a few lives. Glad I made it back to talk to you folks. You ready?
Yeah, what's Aaron's?
What do you call 4 bullfighters standing in a quicksand pit?
What?
Cuatro cinco. I like that one.
What's the next question?
Hang on now. Okay. Woodwork Learner. Have you started building this year's doghouse?
No, but I'm putting a really nice addition onto my current doghouse with a jacuzzi. So.
Oh, alrighty. James Lettner asks, could you use a gouge in a routing plane depending on the size of the gouge?
I have never seen a hand router with a gouge. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but I've never seen one. Technically, it should work. It would be fun to try. Never tried it though. Maybe someday. But yeah, technically it should work. I don't know. I would find freehand gouge far more accurate and smoother to use than a router. I would kind of view the router as a jig for the gouge. But yeah, be kind of fun to play with. Just never have. What's next?
John Day asks, what is the easiest and most used handmade plane?
The easiest and most used handmade plane?
That's what it says.
I don't know. Any handmade plane should be just about as useful as any other. You're probably talking about what's the easiest one to make. It would probably be, if you look up print-off style hand plane, a laminated print-off plane. And what you do is you take your block of wood and you cut the two sides off of it. And you can cut the escapement and the mouth out of that middle block. Then glue the two sides back on and you put a pin through it. And the wedge sits against that pin. It's a very easy plane to make. I don't like laminated planes as much because I find them to be too easy. There's not enough challenge in them. But they're very easy and very functional to make. So yeah, I'd definitely say look up Krenoff style planes. What's next?
Oh, you unplugged it now, so you don't know that Tom just super chat. Oh, no, there it goes.
There it
I thought
goes.
you plugged it back in.
What does Tom have to say?
When is the BLO Fest for all Knights and Wood by Wright people? And when is the night shirt being made? Neil's humbling before the court.
The night shirt being made?
I think we talked about... Oh, like the individual night shirts, Tom? Like with your names?
Oh. Yeah, that'd be a fun one. That'd be a really fun one. I should do that sometime. Well, maybe we'll do it on a hive mind and get those printed and have everyone's name on there. I should start that up. Yeah, that'd be a fun one. I'll have to look up what there was a cost for individual printing, but yeah, we can do that.
You ready?
Yep.
What's the biggest difference between chemistry and cooking?
What?
In chemistry, you should never lick the spoon.
Truth.
And I guess if it's just sodium chloride, maybe, but...
What's next?
C. Joe, do you own any Lee Nielsen tools? I notice a lot of Veritas, but not Lee Nielsen. You have one, don't you?
I have a Veritas float. I have a Lee Nielsen float. I have a Lee Nielsen iron. I don't have many Lee Nielsen tools. I have a few, like I have one Veritas plane, 2 Veritas saws, and the shooting board. I have the marking gauge. I'm trying to think what else I have. I'm sure I have a few more. There's a big mindset between Lee Valley and Veritas. And this is something that a lot of people really get confused. Most people think that they're both high quality tools and they're the exact same thing. They have completely different mindsets. Lee Nielsen wants historical, functional, so they take the historical shapes, like the bedrock pattern. And they make a few tweaks to it, but they keep it very, very similar to what used to be. And there is a very nostalgic nature to Lie-Nielsen. And it's a very handmade nature to it, so they tend to be more expensive. Veritas, on the other hand, tends to say, you know, we've seen all these old styles, but we want to throw that away and start from new. We want to do things a little differently. We want to add more bells and whistles and tweak things. So Lie-Nielsen tends to be a more modern view, and Veritas tends to be a more modern view, and Lie-Nielsen tends to be a more historical view. And Veritas tends to be a little bit more cost-effective than Lie-Nielsen. And so that really fits into my style. I'm a very techie. I'm a very computer guy. I am very cutting-edge geeky.
I was going to say, look in the dictionary, geek, there's you.
Yeah, I have a massive smart house with lots of interconnected things. Everything I own is smart except for the tools down here. And so if I could have a smart hand plane that's connected to my phone, like keeps tracks of shavings and things like that, I would buy that. I would love that. That would be amazing. Veritas is kind of like the closest to that, the geeky side to me, and that kind of calls to me. And so that's why I tend to have more Veritas things. Also, the Veritas things tend to be a little more cost effective, and so that's probably why I tend to do that. But for those of you who are very much into the feel, the fit and finish, the historical quality, then that's where Lie-Nielsen would take you. So, both great functioning tools that will treat you incredibly well and last lifetimes, just two different ways of doing it. What's the next question?
Sorry, hang on. Andy Puttbach asks, how do you keep a snail from clogging when drilling softwood?
If the snail is clogging, it's usually because the cutter is not sharp. And so the snail can't grip the wood enough to cut with the blade. So you have to sharpen the blade so that the snail requires less force to pull it through. And so almost every time, if the snail is dull, if the snail keeps clogging up, it's because the blade is not sharp. Very few instances of the snail itself having an issue, unless like the tip is broken off or something of that nature. Especially with softwood. Softwood is rarely an issue with that. Now, if you're going into like ingrain maple, then you might need a lower pitch snail, something that goes less with each rotation. But yeah, most of the time, 99% of the time, it's that the cutter isn't sharp enough for what you're doing. So, I have a video on how to sharpen if you want to see that. What's next?
Perez Hernandez asks, is it a good idea to use a threaded rod as a vise screw?
It can, and it works well. The only problem is that it is very slow, and so you have to crank it and 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 crank it. A half inch in, crank it and 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 crank it. Oh, 3/4 inch in, and crank it and crank it. It's incredibly slow, and so that gets a little frustrating. But it is very cost effective and cheap. Probably the most cost effective that I like is a leveling leg off of scaffolding. And those actually work really well, and they're a fairly aggressive pitch. So you can use those to actually run pretty well. So they're like $20 a piece. Well, you might even be able to get them cheaper if you get them used. But they actually work pretty well. What we got next? And if we don't, if you really want us to get to a question, throw up a super chat. We're probably not going to get to anything that's been down the list a ways. So.
Alrighty. Jose Mejia Perez. I wanted to buy a diamond plate for sharpening. What grits should I get?
When you talk about diamonds, you really can't talk about grit. Now they're all going to list a grit because they wouldn't sell anything if they didn't list a grit, but grit doesn't mean anything for diamonds. Like DMTs, the ones I use, I usually tell people get the coarse, get the medium fine, or what they now call fine, and then the extra fine. And those three are what I like. So usually whatever company you're going to want to get, one that is a step up from the bottom, one that's about middle, and then one that's as high as they go. That's about the range that you want. In actuality, they list them as like 600, 800, and 1200 grit, but in actual cutting, they are nowhere near those in whetstones or sandpaper because they cut in a different pattern. So actually listing grit is very confusing because with diamonds, I'll stop at a 1200 grit. Whereas if I'm on whetstones, I'm usually going to stop around a 6000 grit just because they cut differently. What's next?
Neolithic 71 asks, planning to make a batch of wooden arrow shafts from square wooden stock using hand tools. I plan to plane away corners until they are round. Any advice to help keep them uniform diameter?
Yes, you're going to want to make a shafting jig. If you look, I have a video on making a pool cue, and it's a very similar thing. It's just it'll need to be much smaller. And all it is a trough at 90 degrees, two sides of the trough at 90 degrees, and the points of the trough are as high as what you want to plane it down to. And so you can put the square in there, and the square will sit with a point up, and you plane that square down, and then you rotate it, and you plane that corner down, and you rotate it again, you plane that corner down, and you're left with an octagon. And then once you have an octagon, you can do an eighth of a turn as opposed to a full quarter turn, and you can plane that down, and each one of those allows you to get closer and closer around. But yeah, look up the pool cue video, and you'll see that. But it's a very simple trough with a stop on the end, so you can plane against it, but it allows you to get a nice smooth shaft. Now, when you're working with arrows, though, you want to make sure that it is riven wood, not just straight grained wood. Make sure it is riven, because you do not want the grain running out of the shaft. Otherwise, when it gets compressed by the string, you might actually have an arrow that splits in two coming out of the bow. And yeah, I've wanted to do that. That'd be a very good video. I should do that sometime.
Well, then you got to make the bow from hand tools too.
What's that?
You got to make the bow out of hand tools too.
Yeah, that would be fun. I used to do archery, and I made arrows a while ago.
We could call it the Robin Hood hour. I'd be all over that one. Anyways.
Next?
Zach Dow production. How long should dovetailing take, and should I care? I feel that I spend way too much time on casework, drawers, etc., like 1 to 2 hours, sometimes for one pair of tails and pins.
Yeah, dovetailing takes as long as it needs to. When I first got into it, four sides of a drawer, 4 dovetail corners would be 4 hours, an hour on each corner. Now, if you're doing a bunch of them, you can gang cut them. So put all your tails together and cut them all at once. And then you can set them out on the bench and chop them all at once, so you're not doing individual steps. Things go a lot faster than that. I actually have a video that I made 3 or 4 years ago, gang cutting dovetails. I think it's how to cut dovetails faster, something like that. But, you know, it's one of those things that the only way to get faster at it is to do more of them, and I mean lots of them. It's one of those things that it's just, don't try and make them faster, try and make them better, and in the course of making them better, you will learn how to make them faster. The only way to make them faster is just to do more. So focus on quality, don't think about time. Think about the fun you're having in the shop, think about the moment that you're working on it, don't think about getting it done. That'll just cause you more frustration. So yeah, focus on what you're doing. Focus on the time in the shop. Focus on the fun you're having, and it will not be as much of a problem of, oh no, this is taking me an hour and a half to do these dovetails. What's next?
Daniel Comu asked, I have an old wooden jointer plane with a pretty wide mouth. How wide can I get it before I need to fix it, and how would you fix it?
You know, with a jointer plane, you don't need a tight mouth. It is nice in that you get a little less tear out, but usually when I'm jointing a board, I'm going to joint it with the jointer plane, And then I'm going to come in with a smoother and do the little detail to clean up anything on there. Because as long as I know it's jointed flat, then I can come in with a smoothing plane and go from one to the other and take off the same amount, and I'm not going to be changing its flatness. So you don't have to do that. But I'd say if the mouth gets bigger than 1/8 inch, 3/16, maybe as much as a quarter. Nah, a quarter would be pushing it. 3/16 I think would be pretty big. So anything around that, you might want to think about opening up. What you'll end up doing is right in front of the iron, you'll actually cut out a mortise, cut out a rectangular section the whole width of the mouth, and then you plug in a new piece. So just like a bow tie, except for it's rectangular instead of bow tie shaped. And that piece will then close up the whole mouth. And you want to make it bigger than it needs to be so the iron can't come out. And then you file it back so it's the exact amount for a nice tight mouth. But yeah, you can get an insert like that. And I know some people will put metal inserts in there. I don't generally suggest that because as you need to flatten it in the future, the metal will then become a high spot that doesn't flatten or wear away at the same speed. So just do it out of a similar piece of wood and you'll get the best results from that. What's next?
Manning Made Woodcraft. I have a Bedrock 606 that's in terrible shape. Has a substantial crack from the mouth to the top of the casting. Is this plane worth anything, or should I just go ahead and repair and make it a worker?
Oh man, cracks up the side like that are. You can try to fix it. A brazing or a really careful TIG welding might work. They take a lot of skill to do that. Anytime I need it done, I actually take it to a guy who I know can do good work. And even with him, it's usually like a 70% chance it'll work. And you really got to be careful. You got to clamp the thing down and make sure that everything is exactly the way it should be. And you got to clamp it to a large piece of steel so that it stays flat. There's a heat sink on there drawing it away from the sole. And you have to let it cool slowly, well clamped to that surface to keep it flat. Otherwise it's going to want to bow and distort the plane. And then there's the chance of it. Yeah, it's a very, very difficult thing to fix. It can be done, but it is very difficult. So was he asking, should he fix it, or
should he make it just a workhorse, or is it worth trying to fix it up?
If you can work with the crack, if the crack isn't fully there and warping, then yeah, just be careful with it. And someday that crack will work all the way through, and it will warp and flex. In that case, you'd want to fix it. But if it's still functional, then it's still functional. Don't worry about too much. Just be careful with it. But yeah, it will be a pain to fix when it's time to actually fix it. What's next?
Sorry.
What?
They were saying, how you and Paul and Rex, are good inspirations. And then there was a little battle between you and Rex. And then I said, but do you see Rex's wife in the shop? Might get her in there. I don't know.
Rex and I were talking about that the other day.
I don't know Rex. I haven't watched any of his videos. So I really have no opinion. Of course, you know my favorite channel. But anyways, it's Paul Sellers. No, I'm teasing. Okay, Jose Mejia Perez. I wanted to buy a diamond stone. How many do I need to start?
You only need one. Having all three of them is very useful. If you have to get one, I say get the finest. Get the extra fine first. If you're just using it for sharpening, because as long as you stay on top of it, you don't let it get too dull, you can just do extra fine strop and you're good to go. The other ones are for when you let it go longer. And the more you let it go longer, the more aggressive you're going to have to get with it. And so you might need to get those. If you're using it for just reshaping irons, then you're probably going to want to get a coarse stone first. I generally tell people stay away from the extra coarse. They don't last as long because the bigger grit is easier to knock off. And so extra coarse plates tend to have more problems, but they are very fast cutting. It's just they don't last as long as the other ones. So if you're just going to be using it for sharpening, stick with the extra fine, because as long as you stay on top of it, you don't let it get too dull, you can just do extra fine and strop. So, is that another one?
Yes, it's from Fly Fishing Chief, but I didn't see any comments. So if you meant to throw something out there or a question, please make sure you put it in.
What's the next question?
Everyone is intrigued by the pickle.
The pickle?
The red button.
What about the pickle?
They want to know the red button. Like we have some Destructo button. We really should put a do not touch sticker.
Control pickle. My master's work was in technical theater, so automation and special effects for the theater, and that is left over from my my time there. And so that was actually a control pickle that I've used for many different things, most commonly on turntables because I have forward, reverse, and emergency stop. Yeah, it's just a throwback to my past. It controls nothing. The cable just goes up into the wall here.
Okay, here's Fly Fishing Chief's question. Is big box store firewood any good, or is it too dry for wood carving or projects?
Big box store firewood?
I guess.
Depend on what type of firewood. Because firewood comes in all different types, from really hard maple down to pine. Most of the time it's softer stuff. But I've seen cherry and walnut as firewood. So yeah, no, most of the time it's dry enough, and so it'll be a little harder to carve, but it's still functional. You just have to take it slower. You have to follow the grain more. It'll splinter off. Green wood is easier to work with because it doesn't splinter as much, and so it follows the grain a little bit easier. It tends to be a little softer, so it's easier to push the tools through. So dry wood, you can still carve it and work with it. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult. You're going to have to put a little more work into it. But it really depends on the type of wood. And when you're looking at firewood, that can be kind of hard to say, is this ash? Is this oak? Is this hickory? All three of those look very similar as firewood. They'll have slightly different, if you look at them in grain, because with oak you can see the rays. But hickory and ash as firewood actually look really, really similar, though both are pretty hard. Elm also looks pretty similar as well. So it just depends.
So Fly Fishing Chief needs a joke.
What's his mom joke?
What do you call a woman who always knows where her husband is? A widow.
Okay,
we probably have time for... I have 4 questions. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them.
Okay.
Asbestos fingers. My boards cup and bow really bad when I try to resolve them. Is it case hardening?
It could be case hardening. It could be just natural tension in the board that comes out over time. If you cut them and right after you cut them they're nice and straight, but you set them down for a little while and they both cup away from each other, then that's case hardening for sure, because the inside was moist, and as they cup away from each other, that is allowing all of the water to leave the inside, and so that side shrinks. But if they both cup in the same direction, then that's usually natural tension in the board that has been let loose. So yeah, it could be a couple different things, but yeah. What's next?
Jose Mejia Perez, should I buy 2 DMT plates or 1 trend double-sided stone?
Up to you. DMT I find to be a little bit better quality, a little longer lasting than trend. And so generally I'm going to say go DMT. However, it's nice to have a double-sided plate that you don't have to do that with. I don't like double-sided plates because I like having a sharpening station where they're all set, boom, boom, boom. I don't like having to flip things back and over, but it's a personal preference. The other thing for me is DMT's customer service is incredible. Anytime I've had any issue with any of their products, it has been no questions asked. They send out a new one. Like I had an extra course that started to bubble up on me. And I just sent them an email with a question, like, oh, we'll send you a new one. And they sent it out as soon as they got a new one. And I still have the old one. And I had another problem with a paddle. The metal piece broke loose, and I contacted them, and they immediately sent it out. So their customer service is top notch. But if that's something that's not important to you, then it just depends on your price tag. For me, DMT, because I like the quality and I'm willing to spend on something, these will last me for years. I like that. But sometimes you don't have the money for it, and it's better to go with the two-sided. What's next? One more and we'll call it.
Okay. Michael Curry asked, any tips for working Douglas fir? Any opinion about it as a cabinet wood?
Douglas fir is a softwood, but it's still a functional wood. There's just going to be a lot of knots. The grain goes a bunch of different directions. My first bench was out of Douglas fir. Works well for that. If you're talking about general furniture, it can do that. Just understand it's going to get dented. It's going to get scratched. It's never going to look great because it tends to, it's just going to get beat up really fast. But functional-wise, yeah, you can make things out of it, no problem. Just understand it's not going to be. It's going to get beat up. So yeah. So I think that will do it for tonight. What am I missing anything?
Nope.
Then we will be back next week every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central Time, and I'm not sure what we'll be doing next week. But the one after that, we're actually going to be in Florida, so we might be doing something fun for that. So stay tuned.
We're running away.
Cool.
That the children are coming with.
So that'll do it. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Bye.